On the coldest Halloween night, as the wind howled through the trees and the streets of Willow Creek were covered in dry leaves, a man returned to the place he had sworn never to see again. Adrian Blake, the billionaire who built empires, lost loved ones, and learned to hide scars behind expensive suits, now stood before the rusty gate of the old Maple Hollow Orphanage. The very place where he grew up, the very place that raised him, and the very place he had abandoned without looking back. The town, decorated with orange lights and the laughter of costumed children, was celebrating Halloween. But for Adrian, that night was far from a celebration. It was a summons. The sound of the wind felt like a call, and each step he took towards that forgotten building seemed to drag the weight of the past with it. The air smelled of old wood and memories. The floor creaked under his feet as if the orphanage itself were breathing once again, awakening memories that time had tried to erase. Sister Margaret's gentle voice waking him early for breakfast, the children's laughter in the courtyard, the silent promise that everyone there would one day become someone. But now the orphanage was in ruins, about to be demolished to make way for a luxury resort. And the man responsible for authorizing the demolition was him. Adrian held the old key in his hands, the same one he had taken when he left, and for the first time in many years, he wasn't sure if he had the courage to unlock it. Yet something pushed him forward. It wasn't guilt, it was a premonition. When he finally crossed through the gate, the world seemed to shift. The silence inside was different, deeper, as if time had stopped to watch him. Cracked walls, dust-covered windows, shadows dancing in the dim moonlight. On one of the tables, he found a piece of paper covered in soot, handwritten in a familiar script. "The truth awaits you, Adrian. And it shines when the lanterns are lit." It was at that moment that he understood, this wouldn't just be another Halloween. It would be the last, and the most important of his life. Because in that forgotten orphanage, amidst the darkness and the floating lanterns on the river, Adrian Blake would discover something that no amount of money could buy: the truth about who he was. And the price the past exacts when we try to forget it. And that night, between the sound of the wind and the glow of the lanterns, he would learn that some ghosts don't return to scare. They return to remind. The jet landed under a cloudy, cold sky as Adrian Blake returned to Willow Creek after 2 decades, and the first impression was the same as always. Narrow streets with wooden facades, orange banners crossing the square, the smell of roasted pumpkin wafting from food trucks set up for the pumpkin festival. He asked the driver to drop him off in front of Maple Hollow home and walked the rest of the way alone, trying to ignore the signs announcing demolition in 7 days to make way for a luxury resort that he himself, unknowingly, had helped approve in New York. The orphanage's facade, once proud, now displayed broken windows and peeling paint, but it still had that shelter-like feel, silently promising protection. Adrian pushed open the gate, heard the familiar creak, and entered the dusty lobby, where the wooden floor gave slightly under his steps. He turned on his phone's flashlight, scanning the old murals with clippings from local newspapers: Fall Fair, Book Campaign, Congratulations, Class of 2003, and felt a real weight on his chest as he remembered Sister Margaret calling his name on cold mornings. His phone vibrated, the CFO, eager for confirmation. "Seal the deal, Adrian." He glanced at the crooked demolition notice stuck to the pillar, took a deep breath, and replied only, "We'll talk later," hanging up as if cutting a rope before it could drag him down. He methodically went through the rooms, checking doors, windows, the small kitchen, the study room, and decided to lock the main entrance with the old key he still carried. Not out of nostalgia, but to signal to himself that this was not yet finished. Outside, the wind lifted golden leaves onto the porch, children practiced their trick-or-treat on the opposite sidewalk, and reality hit clearly. He had 7 days to decide whether he would be the executive who sweeps the past away with a check or the man who faces his own beginning and tries to fix it. He carefully folded the demolition notice, tucked it into his jacket as one would a final warning, and walked back to the street, already with the uncomfortable feeling that, this time, Willow Creek wouldn't let him leave unscathed. The following morning, with the sky washed in pale blue, Adrian returned to Maple Hollow, carrying work gloves and a lantern, ready to scour the building as if it were a living archive. He began with the hallway of photographs. Children with makeshift diplomas, volunteers holding donation boxes, Sister Margaret smiling wearily, and himself, a boy with messy hair and a reserved look, a portrait that, for a moment, made him avert his gaze. In the cafeteria, the rows of tables and the chair marks on the floor showed a routine that no longer existed. The kitchen, with cracked tiles, still held labels for apple and cinnamon in a cabinet. In the office, he opened drawers, found old receipts, thank you notes, and finally, an envelope sealed with faded wax addressed to Adrian, for when he returns. Sister Margaret's handwriting filled the room. If you're reading this, it's because you've understood that there are debts that can't be paid with money. Look behind the large frame in the east corridor. He wasted no time. Back in the hallway, he removed the nails with a knife's blade, lifted the heavy frame, and found a fabric pouch hiding a second message with a certificate that mentioned the name of his biological mother and, to his surprise, Michael Latham, the investor interested in demolishing Maple Hollow. The air grew colder when coincidences turned into connections. Adrian breathed deeply, tucked the documents into his jacket, and before leaving, noticed a trail of extinguished candles through the hall, likely from past vigils around Halloween, when the town used to pass by with lanterns to honor those who had passed. His phone rang with a local number. Adrian Blake. This is Claire Dawson. We need to talk. Tonight, at 7, at the Pumpkin Festival. He agreed without argument. As he closed the gate, he heard children laughing as they rehearsed their costumes and, for the first time since his arrival, felt that the entire town, with its autumn smells, orange lights and stacked memories, was about to testify either for or against what he would do next. Whether he liked it or not, the ghosts of the past had names, a set time, and an address right in the heart of Willow Creek. The evening fell over Willow Creek, painting everything in shades of copper, and the festival lights began to flicker across the central square. Adrian arrived with his dark coat buttoned up and his mind full of questions. Children ran back and forth with candy buckets, while local musicians played guitar on a bandstand covered in leaves. The smell of pumpkin pie and hot cider filled the air. He watched the scene with some discomfort, as if he were observing a memory that no longer belonged to him. Then he heard the voice that snapped him out of his trance. Firm, slightly hoarse, carrying years of distance. I thought you wouldn't have the courage to come back. It was Claire Dawson, the same girl with braids who used to run through the halls of Maple Hollow, now a woman in her early 30s with determined eyes and a restrained smile. The reunion wasn't warm. She crossed her arms and said she still remembered the day he left without looking back, promising to write, promising to help, and then disappearing. Adrian tried to explain that life had swallowed him, that everything had turned out differently than he had imagined, but the words sounded hollow. Claire didn't seem interested in apologies, only in facts. Are you really going to let them destroy the place where we grew up? She asked. He looked away toward the lit stage, avoiding a direct answer. The music stopped, and the wind blew hard enough to snuff out a few candles decorating the stalls. Claire adjusted her scarf and spoke more softly. It's not about the building, Adrian. It's about who you've become. He felt the blow as if it were literal. He tried to argue that the orphanage was unsustainable, that no one had kept it alive for years, but she shook her head, disappointed. Sometimes what's dead doesn't need to be saved, just remembered with respect. Before leaving, she handed him an envelope. This is from Sister Margaret. She left it with me before she died. She said one day you'd come back. Claire disappeared into the festival lights, and Adrian stood still, watching the orange balloons rise into the sky. The cold wind brought the sound of children laughing and the sweet smell of roasted pumpkins. He opened the envelope right there. Inside, a single handwritten sentence. The truth you fear is closer than you think. Adrian walked to the edge of the square, where the river reflected the lights of the floating lanterns, and realized that this town seemed to be watching him, testing him. The church bells rang 9 times. The festival continued merrily, but inside, everything felt heavy and suspended, like the silence before a storm. He looked back at the center, saw Claire talking to a tall man in a gray suit. Michael Latham. The investor, the name on the document, the stranger who knew too much. They exchanged a quick handshake, and Claire glanced at him with an unreadable expression. Adrian understood that something bigger was unfolding, and for the first time since his return, he felt real fear, not of the past, but of what he still didn't know. The next morning, the temporary office set up in the old Willow Creek Town Hall was filled with blueprints, models, and documents about the new resort. Adrian entered unannounced, greeted the receptionist, and demanded to speak with Michael Latham. The investor received him with a polite smile and a hot coffee in hand, as if he knew this meeting was inevitable. "Mr. Blake, have you finally decided to visit the heart of progress?" he joked, gesturing to the boards on the table. Adrian kept his tone firm. "What do you really want with Maple Hollow?" Michael set his cup down, interlaced his fingers, and replied with rehearsed calm. "Business, of course. And perhaps, a bit of family history." The words made the air denser. Adrian feigned ignorance, but Michael continued. "You know, I've always been curious about that orphanage. There's so much romance surrounding it, don't you think? A place that raises boys destined for greatness." Adrian leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "What exactly do you know about me?" Michael chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that provokes more than it comforts. "Enough to want to buy the land, but not enough to understand why you want to stop me." The tension between them filled the room. The clock marked each second like a hammer. Adrian realized that this man had been studying him, perhaps for longer than he had realized. Michael stood up, circled the table, and placed his hand on a black folder. "Tell me, Adrian, do you believe blood determines who we are?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Adrian only answered, "I believe choices determine that." Michael opened the folder, showing a copy of the same certificate Adrian had found hidden in the orphanage, and added, "Then perhaps you need to review your choices." The impact was immediate. He knew without a doubt that this man was the Michael from the document. Half-brother. Rival. Shadow. Michael smiled, satisfied with the discomfort he had caused. "You left Willow Creek, built empires. I stayed and learned to survive with the scraps. Now it's my turn to build something on what's left." Adrian left before he said something he couldn't take back. Outside, the autumn wind swept the fallen leaves, and the square was already being prepared for the evening parade. The sound of children rehearsing and lanterns being hung contrasted with the silent rage building inside him. He walked aimlessly to the Maple Hollow gate, opened it, and entered. The walls seemed to watch him in silence. He leaned against the door, took a deep breath, and understood the size of the trap. Michael wanted to destroy the orphanage not just for money, but for revenge. And perhaps Claire, unknowingly, was in the middle of it. The sun began to set, and the orphanage was bathed in an amber glow that resembled a distant fire. Adrian stood there still, listening to the wind sweep through the broken windows, thinking that maybe in this town, the ghosts didn't hide behind doors, they walked in broad daylight, wearing suits and smiles. Nightfall came earlier than Adrian expected, covering Willow Creek with a fine mist that seemed to come from an old dream. He returned to the orphanage, lantern in hand and his heart racing, determined to find what Sister Margaret had wanted him to discover. With each step through the corridors, the sound of the wind seeping through the window cracks mingled with the creaking of the floorboards, as if the house were breathing in slow rhythms. Memories returned in fragments, the smell of hot soup, the laughter of children, the firm touch of Sister Margaret as she scolded him and then hugged him like a mother. When he reached the stairs that led to the attic, he hesitated. The air was heavy, dense, full of dust and the past. But he climbed. Each step sounded like a verdict, and the last one felt like a portal. Up there, the attic lay dormant, covered in years of forgetfulness. Stacked boxes, broken toys, prayer books, and photographs faded by time. In the corner, a wooden chest caught his eye. Large, dark, with the same symbol engraved that had been on the necklace he wore as a child. Adrian knelt, struggled to open the latch, and lifted the lid. Inside, old folders and a series of documents tied with red ribbons. Among the papers and mementos, there was an envelope with no name. The paper smelled of mildew and secrets. When he opened it, he found adoption records, letters exchanged with a man identified only as L. And a final note signed by Sister Margaret. "I protected you both as best as I could. If fate has separated you, the truth will bring you back, even if it hurts." The word "you both" burned in his eyes like a late revelation. Michael Latham. The man now threatening to destroy Maple Hollow wasn't just an investor or a business rival. He was the other child that Sister Margaret had tried to save. The impact of this discovery made the attic spin around Adrian for a moment. He sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and the lantern's light illuminated a fallen photograph next to the chest. Two identical children in diapers, held by a smiling woman. The back of the photo had a nearly faded inscription, "Adrian and Michael, 1987. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the silence was absolute, cut only by the sound of the wind outside. When he descended the stairs, he felt as though the entire house was watching him. The hallway was colder, the air different, as if Maple Hollow itself understood what had just happened. Outside, the moon rose over the horizon, and the Halloween lanterns began to light up the porches. He knew the revelation would change everything, and that forgiveness this time would not be simple, neither for the other nor for himself. On Halloween night, Willow Creek looked like something out of an old postcard. Orange lights hung from every porch, children in costumes paraded through the streets with baskets and smiles, and the sound of laughter and bells blended with the rustling of leaves. Yet, Adrian walked with a different purpose. He held a paper lantern in his hands, one of the hundreds that would be released into the river to honor those who had passed. Claire found him near the main bridge, holding his lantern. Her gaze, once hard, now seemed curious, even cautious. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said. "I didn't think I would either," he replied honestly. They stood in silence for a few seconds, watching the slow current reflect the flames of the lanterns. "I found something in the attic," he began, his voice rough. "About Michael. About me." Claire listened attentively as he explained the photo, the letter, the revelation. When he finished, she took some time to process. "So the man who wants to destroy Maple Hollow is your brother?" He nodded, and the weight of that truth hung between them like a fog. Claire took a deep breath. Maybe he doesn't want to destroy just the building. Maybe he wants to erase what the place represents. And you too. Adrian looked at the reflection of the flames dancing in the water and felt, for the first time, that he understood the full extent of the past. "I spent my life trying to forget this place. And he spent his trying to be remembered. In a way, we both failed." Claire placed her lantern in the water and watched it drift away with the current. "Then start over. Do what's right, not what's easy." He did the same, releasing his lantern, and the flame floated beside hers, two small lights drifting together in the dark. The crowd around them began singing a soft melody, the traditional Halloween hymn of Willow Creek, and the wind blew just enough to scatter the lanterns across the river like falling stars. Adrian stayed there until the end of the event, watching the sky dotted with orange and the soft glow of the candles. When everyone began to leave, Claire touched his arm and simply said, "Tomorrow, come to the school. I want to show you something." He nodded in agreement, unsure of what to expect. He walked alone back to the orphanage, the distant sounds of the town growing quieter with each step. The gate creaked as if it recognized its owner, and the moonlight bathed the abandoned lawn. From the second-floor window, he saw a single candle burning, the same one he had left in the attic, now lit without explanation. His heart raced, but not out of fear. It was as if Sister Margaret, in some way, was still guiding him. Upon entering, the air smelled of burned wax and old wood. He slowly climbed the stairs, opened the attic door, and found the candle still burning steadily, in the same spot where he had left the photo of the brothers. Beside it, a small inscription on the floor, one he swore hadn't been there before. Forgiveness is to illuminate what time has darkened. Adrian carefully blew out the candle, sat on the floor, and stayed there, letting the silence fill the space. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone, only ready. The dawn in Willow Creek brought a cold gray light, the kind of clarity that seemed to ask for silence. Adrian walked to the school where Claire worked, a simple building surrounded by trees that still held the red of autumn. The children played in the yard, wearing remnants of their Halloween costumes from the night before. Claire greeted him in the back room, holding a box in her hands. Inside were notebooks, drawings, and old photographs from the orphanage, donations she had collected over the years. "I thought you might want to see this before it disappears for good," she said. He knelt beside the box and saw one of the images. Sister Margaret in the garden, surrounded by children. In the background, two brown-haired boys played with a ball. The air grew heavy. "It was us," Adrian murmured. Claire watched in silence as he flipped through the papers. There were records of donations from an old company, Latham Industries. He understood then that Michael had inherited not just the last name, but also the resentment of a story that began unresolved. Later, Adrian went to meet Michael. The makeshift office in the town hall felt like a Cold War setting. Blueprints spread across the table, a city map covered in annotations. Michael greeted him with a smile, as if he already knew what was coming. "Came to confirm the kinship," he teased. Adrian took a deep breath and replied, "I came to understand why." The brother crossed his arms, slowly pacing the room. "Why?" "Because while you grew up with books and hope, I grew up with anger. Because Sister Margaret protected you, and with me she hid. And when I finally found out who you were, I realized that the world applauded the man born from the same mistake that condemned me." Michael's tone fluctuated between pain and irony, and each word was a reflection of what Adrian feared. "You don't need to destroy the orphanage to settle the score with me," Adrian said, trying to contain his own tone. "Oh, but I do," Michael retorted. "Because Maple Hollow was the birthplace of the lie. Bringing it down is erasing the trace of what's left of our mother." The silence that followed seemed crueler than the argument. Adrian approached, staring at his brother. "If you want revenge, destroy my name, my businesses, whatever you like, but leave this place in peace." Michael smiled, and in that smile, there was an abyss. "You still don't understand, do you? This place is you." Then he turned and coldly ordered, "The demolition starts tomorrow at 7. Adrian stood frozen, while Michael walked out, leaving behind the dry sound of his shoes on the wooden floor. Outside, the wind lifted the leaves from the ground, and the church bell rang 6 times, like an omen. He walked to Maple Hollow without thinking, without planning, only driven by a deep need to protect what was left. As he crossed the gate, the sun was setting, and the sky turned dark orange. At the top of the hill, the orphanage seemed to resist time, tired but firm, as if it still had something to say. Adrian entered and sat on the main staircase. For the first time, he cried without disguise. He cried for the child he once was, for the woman who raised him, and for the man who hated him without knowing him. When he finally stood up, he looked at the high ceiling and promised, "You will live, Maple Hollow. I swear." And outside, the wind seemed to answer with a faint whistle through the trees. The early morning arrived with the smell of smoke. Adrian woke up to the phone ringing incessantly. Claire, in a panic, warning him that something was happening at the orphanage. He ran down the dirt road, his heart racing, and saw the flames already consuming the roof of Maple Hollow. The firelight reflected in the recent rain puddles, and the air was thick with ashes and memories. Local firefighters were trying to contain the fire, but the old structure was giving way quickly. Without thinking, Adrian crossed the barrier, ignoring the shouts to retreat. He entered through the side, covering his face with his coat, and climbed the stairs that still resisted. The attic where it all began was now a hell of embers. He searched to save whatever he could: folders, photos, anything that proved the history of the place. In the suffocating heat, he found the album that held the photo of the two babies and Sister Margaret's letter. He pressed the album to his chest and ran down, coughing, gasping for air, his eyes stinging. Outside, Claire ran to him, covered in soot, her eyes filled with tears. "You're crazy. You could have died." He could barely respond, coughing between words. I couldn't let it all disappear." The flames rose high, lighting the dark sky with an almost supernatural glow. Sirens echoed through the town, and residents watched in silence. Among them, Michael Latham, standing at a safe distance, his face expressionless. When Adrian saw him, he advanced toward him, but Claire held him back. "Not now," she whispered. Michael stared at him for a few seconds, and before leaving, he simply said, "Looks like fate did the job for me." The fire consumed nearly everything by dawn. Only the outer walls and the crooked iron gate remained standing. Adrian stayed there, covered in ashes, looking at what was left. The orphanage he had promised to save now lay in ruins. Claire approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can still rebuild." He looked at her exhausted and asked, "And if there's nothing left?" She smiled with bittersweet tenderness. "Then start from scratch. That's how we are reborn." In the following days, news of the fire spread across the state. Newspapers spoke of the businessman who risked his life to save a burning orphanage. Investigations began, and everything pointed to arson, though there was no proof. Adrian knew. He knew who had done it. But he also knew that accusing his brother wouldn't bring peace. Not to him, not to the past. Instead, he made a silent decision. He would rebuild Maple Hollow, brick by brick, with his own hands. In the late afternoon, he returned to the still smoking site and placed the salvaged album on the burnt gate. The wind flipped through the pages, stopping on the photo of the two babies. He ran his finger over the image, feeling the ash mix with the tear that fell. "We're still here," he murmured. The breeze picked up, and for a moment, the ashes in the air seemed to form the outline of a woman smiling. Sister Margaret, before scattering under the sunset. Three months had passed since the fire, and winter had arrived in Willow Creek, bringing that biting cold that made the air feel like glass. The Maple Hollow site, once covered in rubble and sadness, now vibrated with hammering voices and the smell of new wood. Adrian woke up every day before the sun rose, drank coffee from a paper cup, and worked alongside the volunteers who came from town. Claire organized donations, the school children painted signs with words of encouragement, hope, home, forgiveness, and hung them on the wire fences. The community, once distrustful of him, now greeted him with silent respect. He had gone from being the distant billionaire to becoming the man who rebuilt with his own hands the place where he had learned the meaning of family. The process was slow, and each brick laid seemed to carry memories. Adrian silently carried the pain and anger he still felt for Michael. From time to time, he would receive anonymous notes in white envelopes, veiled threats, disguised insults, but he never responded. He didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. One afternoon, Claire appeared with an old mailbox she had found among the debris. Inside were dozens of undelivered letters, all addressed to Mr. Blake. They were donation requests, thank you notes, confessions. He spent hours reading them, each word like an open wound, until he found one last letter written by Sister Margaret, dated 2 weeks before her death. "One day, Adrian, you will return. Not to rescue this place, but to rescue yourself in it. When you do, the boy and the man will finally meet." He closed his eyes and understood that it was exactly what was happening. The next morning, snow began to fall lightly, covering the scaffolding and the new gate of Maple Hollow. Adrian looked at the white landscape, and for the first time in many years, he felt something like peace. The community school, which would replace the orphanage, was beginning to take shape. Claire arrived with a bottle of hot coffee and invited him to climb to the newly built roof. From up there, they saw all of Willow Creek stretching out between bare trees and smoking chimneys. "You know," she said, "I thought you had forgotten where you came from. But now I see you were just trying to remember how to return." He smiled, discreetly, and replied, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what's worth rebuilding." A few days later, trucks arrived with materials donated anonymously. Among the receipts was one name that made Adrian's blood run cold: Michael Latham. There was no letter, just full payment for the final stage of the rebuild. Claire looked at him surprised. "Do you think it was out of regret?" He hesitated before answering. "I don't know. Maybe it was just his way of saying goodbye." Neither of them spoke about it again. The building was completed before Christmas. The new windows reflected the golden sunset, and the sign above the entrance read, "Maple Hollow Community Center, founded in memory of Sister Margaret." On the night of the inauguration, the whole town attended. The lights shone, and children sang a slow version of Willow Creek's Halloween hymn, now transformed into a song of hope. Adrian cut the ribbon and stepped onto the small makeshift stage. The speech was simple. "This place isn't about what was destroyed, but about what survived." They applauded, some cried, and Claire, in the back, smiled as if she knew the story had come full circle. When the crowd left, he stayed behind, staring at the lit windows and feeling the invisible presence of Sister Margaret by his side. "I did it, Mother," he murmured. The cold wind blew through the trees, and he swore he heard very faintly a response. "I knew you would." A year later, autumn returned to Willow Creek with its parade of colors and memories. The Halloween festival was more beautiful than ever. Lanterns floated over the river, candies filled the sidewalks, and the town seemed to be reborn with each smile. Maple Hollow, now completely rebuilt, housed children, workshops, and laughter, everything that had been lost, alive again. Adrian walked through the new halls, observing drawings on the walls and restored old photographs. Each frame told a story, and in all of them, the same message: forgiveness. In the courtyard, Claire was waiting for him, holding 2 lanterns in her hands. "The tradition continues," she said. "But this year, you're the one who will light the last one." Together, they walked to the bridge. The river reflected the soft orange of the lanterns, and the cold air brought the smell of apples and burnt wood. Adrian held the lantern carefully and thought about everything: Sister Margaret, Claire, Michael. Time had passed, but the past still lived there, not as a wound, but as a root. He lit the flame and let the lantern drift into the water, watching it float slowly among the others. At that moment, a child about 7 years old approached him, holding a silver necklace. "Mr. Blake?" he asked shyly. Adrian knelt down. "Yes." The boy showed him the necklace. It was identical to the one he wore as a baby, the same one from the photo. "My mom gave me this. She said it was from a friend of hers, someone she met when she was little, here." Adrian felt his heart stop for a moment. "What's her name?" he asked. The boy smiled. "She told me not to tell. Just to tell you she remembers." The boy ran back to the group of children, and his lantern joined the others on the river. Adrian stood still, watching the lights drift away, and he understood that some stories never end, they just change form. The wind blew, lifting golden leaves, and Claire approached in silence, resting her head on his shoulder. "Looks like the past found a way to send a message," she said. "Maybe it's just destiny reminding us that we're never really alone," Adrian replied with a half-smile. The lanterns rose high, reflecting in the cloudy sky, turning Willow Creek into a sea of little living stars. And for a moment, the whole world seemed to breathe in peace. Maple Hollow shone in the distance, full of life, and the sound of children echoed through the hill. Adrian looked at the sky, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried the word, and between the crackling of the candles and the murmuring of the river, there seemed to be a response. Soft, maternal, eternal. Willow Creek finally slept, in light and forgiveness. As the Halloween lanterns floated on the river, Adrian understood that sometimes you need to return to the past to see the present clearly. Maple Hollow was not just an orphanage. It was the symbol of everything he tried to forget. And when the last lantern went out, he realized that true forgiveness isn't about changing what happened, but accepting who you became after everything. If this story touched you in some way, leave a like so more people can feel the same. Write in the comments what you would have done in Adrian's place. Would you have the courage to face your past? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because we still have many emotional stories like this. Stories about secrets, forgiveness, and new beginnings. And if you want to spread this message, share this video with someone you'd like to see reborn from the ashes, just like Adrian.